If you look at famous violinists back to back, you'll see that each one plays the violin a little bit differently. Each one has a slightly different bow hold, a slightly different way of using their arm, and the system works for them, but it's a little different from one another. I've always been interested in analyzing famous violinists' bow holds, and today I want to talk about Oistrakh's bow hold and the way he uses his arm. My name is Niv Ashkenazi, and this is Eye for Technique. Today, let me share with you the 5 most interesting things I have found about Oistrakh's bow arm. One of the first things we can see is that Oistrakh has his fingers a little bit higher towards the stick and a little bit away from the button, sort of like this. And there are many violinists that do this. Some prefer it a little bit further back or a little bit lower, but many do prefer it a little further away and a little bit higher up. Oistrakh's fingers look pretty soft. They're rounded and they aren't really too stiff like some violinists have. And from looking underneath, I saw that he has a curled thumb versus a straight thumb that some violinists use. The most prominent thing I noticed about Oistrakh's playing was that he uses a lot of wrist pronation and he stays in the string the entire time. This means that his wrist never goes up too far because he's using more of a sideways wrist motion rather than an up and down wrist motion. And unlike some violinists, he stays into the string the entire time with this pronation. A lot of violinists will have a little bit of a release at the bow changes, but he doesn't really release the pronation during most of his bow changes. Another part of the system of how Oistrakh uses his bow arm is his arm level. It really looks like he's put his arm on a table and then is opening and closing his arm. Some violinists will have the arm level a little bit higher and be going downwards, others even a little bit lower, but his really feels exactly at table height with a very efficient open and close from the elbow. One of Oistrakh's favorite techniques is portato, which is when you have a legato slur, but you kind of emphasize the notes a little bit. He uses a lot of tips of the finger motion for this, and he releases with that while still keeping his pronation in with his wrist. He sometimes also uses a little bit of arm up and down with the finger up and down to create these portato motions. Even though I keep mentioning how much he's using pronation with the wrist and staying in the string, if you listen to his sound, it's actually really lush and really open sounding. It doesn't feel pressed, even though he is continually applying pressure. So he's found a way to still give us a lot of release in the sound, even though physically he's putting a lot more tension on the bow in a continuous manner. After watching a lot of videos of Oistrakh's playing, I tried to copy it as best I could. And in order to maximize my ability with that, I recorded it on my slow motion camera. It's a professional camera. We're looking at it right now at 500 frames per second. In my normal playing, the way I hold the bow is somewhat similar to Oistrakh's, but the way I use my arm is a bit different. And usually I tend to like to use a little bit more wrist than he does. So one of the first things that I did was work really hard on limiting my wrist motion and using a lot more wrist pronation. So instead of having the up and down motion of the wrist, more of a side to side motion of the wrist so that I wouldn't overarch my wrist. And it allowed me to stay in the string with a good pronation the entire time and really mimic what Oistrakh does. With my normal bow hold, I tend to like to actually cover the eye of the frog. So I needed to move my fingers up a little bit and over in order to copy Oistrakh's bow hold. I also was focusing on opening and closing my elbow very efficiently, which is very similar to how I would play anyways. Again, as I mentioned, some violinists have their elbow a little bit higher and are pushing downwards. Others, like Oistrakh's, are more going back and forth in a neutral plane, and some even have it a little bit lower and are pulling downwards on the bow. One of the biggest advantages I found of using Oistrakh's bow hold and bow system is this pronation aspect. Keeping the pronation into the string, even through bow changes, really leads to a rich and clear sound. It also really complements what I think of when I hear Oistrakh, which is he likes to use really long phrases that seem to never end. And using that deep pronation that also never ends really complements this. One thing that Oistrakh has to do a little bit differently because he's in the string the entire time is find a different way of creating a release in the sound. And a lot of that really comes from the use of his fingers, especially the fingertips, and this portato bowing that he does. We can see this really clearly in this clip from Slavonic dances. As I mentioned before, I in no way think of Oistrakh's sound as sounding pressed. Really, his sound is very silky and open and in a way light while being very rich. And I think that is a combination of that pronation and finding that looseness in the sound using the fingers. If you're anything like me, I think you'll have a great time trying Oistrakh's bow hold and bow arm. And I really encourage you to do it. It's not really about copying his sound exactly. It's more trying out a slightly tweaked bow hold and seeing what does that do for your sound. Is there something that you can take that you like? Are there disadvantages that you don't like? All this is information that can help you continue to develop your sound and your musical voice. If you do end up trying this out, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what you found, what worked for you, what didn't work for you, what you found most difficult, or any other observations that come to mind. If you'd like to see more content like this, please give a like to this video. It really helps me know that this is something you're interested in. And please also let me know in the comments below which famous violinist you'd like me to try and analyze next.